whether man-made or not, one of the worst disasters in human history. And we are genuinely less prepared for the next one than the last one.
It's not one of the worst disasters in human history. I could name 100 worse ones.
Fair enough,
Okay.
but it was bad. I didn't enjoy it.
Let's not be purple.
It was a
about
bad.
Bill Maher is gone. Conservative? You won't believe who's actually making sense on COVID origins and the woke mob. Grab your coffee because we're diving into why I, a Republican, am actually agreeing with Bill Maher on some huge issues.
Fine. And he writes the Weekly Dish newsletter and hosts the podcast The Dishcast with Andrew Sullivan. Andrew Sullivan. Okay, here are the questions. Andrew, what do you think of news that British intelligence knew COVID was a lab leak in 2020 and officially ignored their report?
Not just knew, aided a 95% certainty. Same with the German intelligence service. March 2020. There's a new book out called COVID's Wake. I was reading it this last couple of weeks, and the core paper that killed off any idea that this was a lab leak in China, the proximal origin paper, which was produced with Fauci and Collins of the NIH and NIAID, helping it along, was a lie, a conscious lie. That the people who looked at it, we now have their emails, are saying in the very first days of looking at the virus, this looks very man-made to us. This is so friggin' obvious this is man-made.
Well,
so friggin' obvious, one of them said. And then they wrote the report saying there is no evidence that this was made in a lab. The question is why? Why would they lie to us about that? And they did.
Well, I can give you one answer, the New York Times. The New York Times said any questioning of this being from a lab was racist, which always struck me as odd because it seems much more racist to go, wow, these people are eating bats.
I know.
I mean, it's just one example, but a good example of why people lost faith in the left, because they do stupid things like that. Not to be an I told you so, but from the very beginning, I was saying this shouldn't even be political, but it's at least a 50-50 it came from the lab, and that in 50 years, I can't imagine people going, wait, you mean in 2020, there was this thing that escaped from a lab in Wuhan, that started in Wuhan, and there was a lab in Wuhan that was studying it? And they didn't think that was connected, and they blamed it on bats. Really? It just doesn't make any sense.
It makes a little bit more sense.
You can gaslight people so easily.
Yes, I don't.
All right. Everyone, for years, Bill Maher and I have probably been on opposite sides of a lot of political debates. But recently, I've noticed a refreshing change, a willingness on his part to call out some of the absurdities that have become increasingly prevalent in our society, particularly within certain segments of the left. And honestly, it's something that I think more people, regardless of their political affiliation, need to pay attention to. I recently saw a clip where Maher was talking with Ezra Klein, and it was, well, let's just say Maher didn't hold back. He challenged Klein on some of these so-called woke talking points, and he did it with a common sense approach that I frankly found encouraging. It's not about being mean-spirited or trying to score political points. It's about calling out things that just don't make sense. Things that are actually damaging our ability to have honest conversations and solve real problems. One of the biggest areas where I've seen this shift in Maher, and where I wholeheartedly agree with him, is on the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and crucially its origins.
It's their integrity I'm concerned about, to actually lie and distort what they could see with their own eyes because they were afraid of politics. The other question is this. This lab was a gain of function lab. That means they were creating viruses,
right,
dangerous viruses, to figure out how to protect you from them. This gain of function research was always dangerous. Everyone knew it was dangerous. A long time ago, you go back to 2015, you will find a big meeting in London where they say there's one lab in the world most likely to have a problem with this, Wuhan. Do you know who was the biggest supporter of gain of function research for the last 30 years? Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci. Yeah. Now, remember that name. There's a reason he was given a pardon back to 2014. There is something very wrong going on here.
You know?
Yeah, I also don't think he did it for nefarious reasons. There's an argument to be made. There's an actual intellectual debate to be had. Should gain-of-function research be done? We want to get ahead of viruses. The other answer is, the other response would be, it's too dangerous. Because if it gets out, it's going to be bad, and that's what happened. But I don't think he's an evil guy, like some people do, who was trying to get rich off this.
No.
Okay, he just made the wrong call.
No, he knew from the get-go that the Wuhan lab had security levels that were the average of a dentist's office. They should have been at the highest level imaginable. He knew that. Not only that,
he made the wrong call.
The NIH and NID had helped fund it.
For a long time, as many of you remember, if you dared to suggest that the virus might have come from a lab in Wuhan, you were instantly branded a right-wing extremist, a conspiracy theorist. Even the mainstream media was quick to shut down any such discussion, sometimes even labeling it as racist. But what Bill Maher has been rightly pointing out, and what more and more evidence seems to support, is that this premature dismissal of the lab leak theory was a massive disservice to the truth. Think about it. The epicenter of the outbreak was Wuhan. And right there in Wuhan was a lab studying coronaviruses, including gain-of-function research, the deliberate manipulation of viruses. To suggest that these two things might be connected shouldn't have been some outlandish conspiracy theory. It should have been a legitimate avenue of inquiry. And the fact that intelligence agencies from multiple countries, including Britain and Germany, reportedly had early indications of a lab leak, which were then seemingly ignored, is deeply concerning. Furthermore, the revelations about the proximal origin paper, allegedly influenced by figures like Fauci and Collins at the NIH and NIAID to downplay the lab leak possibility, raise serious questions about the integrity of our scientific institutions. As Maher rightly asks, why would they lie about this? Now, some on the left were so quick to dismiss the lab leak theory, partly because they saw it as politically motivated. But as conservatives, we've always believed in following the evidence, wherever it leads. And the stonewalling and censorship surrounding this issue only fueled suspicion and eroded public trust, not just in the scientific community, but also in the media and government. As Maher said, it's this kind of behavior that makes people lose faith.
So you don't want to go down in history as the person who helped develop the virus that killed millions of people. You want to go down as the one who saved millions of people. That was at stake, a reputational matter.
A piece of a lot of this that seems insane to me is we are now years after, whether man-made or not, one of the worst disasters in human history. And we are genuinely less prepared for the next one than the last one.
It's not one of the worst disasters in human history. I could name 100 worse ones.
Fair enough,
Okay.
but it was bad. I didn't enjoy it.
Let's not be purple.
It was a
about
bad pandemic. Let's put it that way.
This whole situation perfectly illustrates a core conservative principle: the importance of transparency and accountability. When our institutions, especially those dealing with public health and scientific research, are not transparent, when they actively suppress dissenting voices or seemingly manipulate information, it breeds distrust. And that distrust has long-lasting consequences for our society. Beyond the origin of the virus, Maher has also been critical of the overreach of government in its response to the pandemic, particularly the lockdowns and mandates. This is another area where many conservatives have been raising concerns from the beginning. While the initial uncertainty warranted some level of caution, the prolonged and often heavy-handed measures, the vaccine mandates in particular, raise serious questions about individual liberty and the proper role of government. For one, believe in personal responsibility. Adults should have the freedom to make their own health decisions in consultation with their doctors without the heavy hand of government forcing compliance. And as Maher points out, the long-term negative consequences of these policies, the economic damage, the impact on mental health, the erosion of trust. These are things we will be grappling with for years to come. It seems increasingly clear that the response to the pandemic may end up being more historically significant, in a negative way than the virus itself, as Maher suggests.
Certainly not my point on this. I'm happy to see that the Holocaust was worse than the pandemic. I think it's fine. But in other things, other countries, in this country, right? After something terrible happens, you often have these big bipartisan commissions that come up with a bunch of recommendations, and try to create preparedness for next time. I sort of agree with you that we've gone way too far on airport security for too long, but we did a lot on things like biosecurity that made sense and actually did make us safer.
Yeah.
And we have anti-learned lessons.
What's truly concerning, as Maher also highlighted, is the apparent lack of any real effort to learn from the mistakes that were made. Instead of having honest bipartisan commissions to analyze what went wrong and develop better strategies. For the future, we're still stuck in the same political arguments. We haven't established clear guidelines on gain-of-function research. We don't have a unified approach to biosecurity. We seem to be anti-learning lessons, as the source put it. From a conservative standpoint, this failure to learn is particularly troubling because it speaks to a larger problem. The increasing politicization of everything, including science itself. When scientific findings are twisted and distorted to fit a political narrative, when scientists who dare to question the mainstream are ostracized and silenced, it undermines the very foundation of objective truth and our ability to make informed decisions as a society.
Warp speed, and now you got RFK Jr. running HHS. On the other hand, a bunch of huge mistakes were made on things like lockdowns, and we're just arguing about them. We haven't put out, say, a new best practices, right? Gain-of-function research, which y'all were just talking about, it is just an argument. It's something I try to keep paying attention to, and they haven't come out with strong new guidelines. Bird flu, everybody I read who knows what they're talking about says we are in a terrible position on bird flu if it actually begins to mutate and make the jump. We just have never figured out a way to find a policy equilibrium here, as opposed to sort of keep rehaving the argument. The arguments are important.
Because everything gets politicized.
But everything gets politicized.
But
we don't have the capacity to come to agreements. It's really bad that we are this unprepared now.
But that's why the integrity of science is so important.
I agree with you on that.
If we don't trust the scientists, who on earth are we going to trust? And
as Maher rightly points out, if we can't trust the scientists, who can we trust? This brings us back to the core issue of free speech and open debate. As conservatives, we believe that the best way to arrive at the truth is through the vigorous exchange of ideas, even if those ideas are controversial or challenge the prevailing orthodoxy. The impulse to censor and shut down dissenting voices, which Maher has been rightly criticizing, is antithetical to this principle and ultimately harmful to our society. If someone truly believes in their position, they should be willing to defend it through reasoned argument, not by silencing their opponents. So, what's the bottom line here? I commend Bill Maher for his willingness to challenge the prevailing narratives and speak some common sense on these critical issues. As conservatives, we may not agree with him on everything, but on this, we find ourselves in strong alignment. We need more voices, regardless of their political background, who are willing to question authority, demand transparency, and engage in honest debate. We need to move beyond the tribalism and the echo chambers and start having some serious conversations about the lessons learned from the pandemic and how we can better protect our freedoms and our future. It's time to demand accountability from our institutions to push for greater transparency in scientific research and public health, and to reaffirm our commitment to individual liberty and the free exchange of ideas. That's my take on things today, inspired in part by the refreshing honesty I'm seeing from voices like Bill Maher. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to hear more conservative perspectives on the issues that matter. Until next time.